I am Rebecca Chen, 34 years old, and 3 weeks ago I discovered that my father-in-law had stolen my 8-year-old son's entire college trust fund. $67,000 gone. When I confronted him, his response was chilling and matter-of-fact. Boys don't need college money, Rebecca. They need to learn how to work with their hands. What happened next would tear my marriage apart and force me to question everything I thought I knew about the family I had married into. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the daughter of Taiwanese immigrants in Portland, Oregon, education was not just valued in our household, it was sacred. My parents, Dr. Linda Chen and Professor David Chen, had sacrificed everything to build their academic careers in America. Mom worked as a pediatric surgeon, while Dad taught economics at Portland State University. Their story was one of determination, late nights studying English, and the unwavering belief that education was the golden key to opportunity in America. From the time I could hold a crayon, my parents emphasized the importance of learning. Our small apartment near the university was filled with books in both English and Mandarin. Sunday mornings were spent at the kitchen table with Dad, helping me with math problems, while Mom quizzed me on vocabulary words. They never pushed me toward any specific career, but they made it clear that college was not optional, it was inevitable. When I graduated valedictorian from Lincoln High School, my parents wept with pride during my speech. They had worked multiple jobs, saved every penny, and forewent countless luxuries to ensure I could attend any university I chose. I selected Oregon State University for their excellent business program, living at home to save money, and spending my free time helping my parents navigate American bureaucracy and translate documents for their friends in the immigrant community. College was where I met David Martinez, a third-year engineering student with an easy laugh and genuine kindness that drew people to him like a magnet. He was everything my high school boyfriends were not: ambitious, thoughtful, and respectful of my academic goals. While other guys seemed intimidated by my dedication to my studies, David found it admirable. He would study beside me in the library, bringing me coffee during finals week, and celebrating my achievements as enthusiastically as his own. David came from a completely different background than mine. His family had deep roots in Oregon, generations of farmers and construction workers who valued hard work and practical skills over formal education. His father, Roberto Martinez, owned a successful landscaping business that employed half the Hispanic community in their small town of Hillsborough. His mother, Carmen, managed the business side of the operation with an iron fist and a calculator that never seemed to leave her hands. The Martinez family was large, loud, and loving in ways that both fascinated and overwhelmed me. Sunday dinners at their ranch-style home involved at least 15 people, multiple conversations happening simultaneously in both English and Spanish, children running between rooms, and enough food to feed a small army. Carmen would pile my plate high with homemade enchiladas and tamales, insisting I was too skinny and needed to eat more. Roberto, or Papi, as everyone called him, was a man of strong opinions and stronger convictions. He stood barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, but his presence filled any room he entered. His hands were permanently stained with soil and calloused from decades of physical labor. He spoke with pride about building his business from nothing, starting with a single lawnmower and transforming it into a company that employed 30 people and maintained some of the most exclusive properties in the Portland metropolitan area. During my first dinner with the Martinez family, Papi regaled us with stories about his early days in America. He spoke with pride. Abore had arrived from Guadalajara at 17, with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. "College is fine for some people," he said, gesturing with a fork full of rice. "But real success comes from here," pointing to his chest, and here, holding up his calloused hands. I smiled politely, not wanting to contradict my boyfriend's father, but privately disagreeing with his philosophy. David caught my expression and later explained that his father's views came from his own experiences. Roberto had watched college-educated managers run companies into the ground while hard-working employees lost their jobs. To him, practical skills and business sense mattered more than theoretical knowledge. Despite our philosophical differences about education, Roberto treated me with warmth and respect. He would ask about my classes, not because he was particularly interested in marketing theory, but because he could see how important my studies were to me. Carmen often pulled me aside to share family recipes and stories about David's childhood, making it clear that I was welcomed into their circle. David and I dated through the remainder of college, our relationship growing stronger as we navigated the challenges of balancing academics, part-time jobs, and planning for our futures. He understood my family's emphasis on education because he had witnessed my parents' journey firsthand. During visits to my parents' house, he would sit for hours listening to my father explain economic theories, or ask my mother detailed questions about her surgical procedures. My parents initially had reservations about David, not because of any personal qualities, but because they worried about cultural compatibility. "Rebecca," my mother said one evening as we prepared dinner together, "David is a wonderful young man, but his family sees the world very differently than we do. Are you prepared for those differences to become more significant over time?" I assured her that David and I shared the same values, regardless of our families' backgrounds. We both believed in hard work, treating people with respect, and building a future based on mutual support and understanding. Our cultural differences felt like strengths rather than obstacles, each of us bringing unique perspectives that enriched our relationship. After graduation, David secured a position with an engineering firm in Beaverton, while I began working for a marketing agency in downtown Portland. We moved in together in a small apartment in the Pearl District, splitting expenses and saving money for our future. Those early years of our relationship were filled with the excitement of establishing our adult lives together, exploring Portland's food scene, taking weekend trips to the coast, and planning for the future we wanted to build. The proposal came 2 years later during a hiking trip to Mount Hood. David had arranged for both sets of parents to meet us at the lodge afterward, wanting to share the moment with everyone who mattered to us. My parents brought champagne and congratulatory flowers. Roberto and Carmen brought a mariachi band that happened to be performing at the lodge restaurant. The celebration perfectly encapsulated our families, different approaches to marking special occasions, and somehow it worked beautifully. Wedding planning became an exercise in diplomatic compromise. My parents wanted an elegant ceremony at a historic hotel with a sit-down dinner and classical music. David's family envisioned a celebration at their family ranch, with barbacoa, dancing, and festivities that would last until dawn. We ultimately chose a middle ground, a ceremony at a beautiful vineyard in the Willamette Valley, followed by a reception that honored both traditions. The wedding itself was magical. My father walked me down the aisle while David waited at the altar, tears streaming down his face. Roberto served as one of David's groomsmen, his usual work boots replaced with polished dress shoes that he complained about throughout the reception. Carmen and my mother worked together to coordinate the catering, somehow managing to incorporate both.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Taiwanese spring rolls and Mexican street corn into the menu. During his father of the groom speech, Roberto spoke about David's character and work ethic, but also acknowledged the importance of education in my family. "Rebecca has shown me that there are many ways to be successful in this world," he said, raising his glass. "What matters is not how you get there, but who you choose to travel with." It was a gracious acknowledgement of our differences, and a blessing for our union. Our first years of marriage were blissful in the way that early marriage can be, when two people are genuinely compatible and committed to building something together. We bought a small house in Tigard, close enough to both families for regular visits but far enough away to establish our own traditions. David's engineering career flourished, and he was promoted twice in 3 years. My marketing work evolved into a specialization in social media strategy, and I eventually left the agency to freelance for tech companies throughout the Pacific Northwest. The question of children arose naturally as we approached our 3rd wedding anniversary. We both wanted kids and had always discussed having a family as part of our long-term plans. David was excited about the prospect of coaching Little League and teaching his children to fish. I envisioned reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, and nurturing young minds the way my parents had nurtured mine. When I became pregnant with our son, both families erupted with excitement. Carmen immediately began knitting baby blankets and planning the nursery. My parents started researching the best preschools in our area and investing in educational toys. Roberto, true to form, began planning the vegetable garden he would plant with his grandchild and the treehouse he would build in our backyard. Pregnancy was relatively easy for me, despite the fatigue and morning sickness that dominated the first trimester. David was an attentive partner, accompanying me to every doctor's appointment and reading pregnancy books with the same dedication he applied to engineering manuals. He installed a ceiling fan in the nursery, assembled the crib with military precision, and spent hours discussing potential names. We ultimately chose Marcus David Martinez, honoring both David's heritage and my preference for names that worked well in both English and Spanish. Marcus arrived 2 weeks early on a rainy Tuesday morning in October, weighing 7 pounds and 3 ounces. The delivery was uncomplicated, and David cried harder than I did when the doctor placed our son in his arms for the first time. Roberto and Carmen arrived at the hospital within hours, bringing flowers, balloons, and enough food to feed the entire maternity ward. Roberto held Marcus with surprising gentleness for such rough hands, whispering to him in Spanish about all the adventures they would have together. "Migo," he said softly, "your abuelo is going to teach you everything about working with your hands and building things that last." My parents arrived that evening with a thoughtful gift, a college savings account they had opened in Marcus's name with an initial deposit of $5,000. "Education is the foundation of opportunity," my father explained as he showed us the account paperwork. "We want to ensure Marcus has every advantage as he grows up." The gesture touched David deeply, especially since my parents had included his surname on all the account documents. It represented their acceptance of our family and their commitment to supporting our son's future, regardless of their previous reservations about our cultural differences. Those early months of parenthood were simultaneously exhausting and exhilarating. Marcus was an easy baby who slept through the night by 3 months and rarely fussed unless he was hungry or needed changing. David took to fatherhood naturally, waking up for midnight feedings without complaint and spending hours reading to Marcus even though our son was too young to understand the words. Roberto visited weekly, always bringing some small gift for Marcus and stories about the business. He had strong opinions about child-rearing, insisting that boys needed to be tough and independent. "You cannot coddle him too much, Rebecca," he would say when I worried about Marcus crying. "Boys need to learn that the world is not going to cater to their every need." While I appreciated Roberto's involvement in Marcus's life, some of his comments made me uncomfortable. When I mentioned enrolling Marcus in a music class for toddlers, Roberto laughed dismissively. "Music class? What he needs is to spend time outdoors, getting dirty and learning about real work." David usually redirected these conversations diplomatically, but I could sense tension building between his respect for his father and his support for my parenting choices. As Marcus grew from infant to toddler, these philosophical differences became more pronounced. My parents brought educational toys and books appropriate for his developmental stage. Roberto brought toy trucks and insisted that Marcus needed to learn about engines and construction equipment. Both approaches had merit, but the underlying tension about what constituted appropriate preparation for adulthood simmered beneath family gatherings. Marcus himself was a delightful child who seemed to inherit the best qualities from both sides of his heritage. He was curious and intelligent, like my family, but also physically bold and mechanically inclined like the Martinez clan. He could sit for extended periods working on puzzles or listening to stories, but he also loved playing in the dirt and helping David with household projects. When Marcus turned 3, David and I decided to increase our contributions to his college fund. My marketing business was thriving, and David had received another promotion that came with a significant salary increase. We met with a financial advisor who helped us establish automatic monthly contributions and choose investment options that would maximize growth over the 15 years until Marcus would need the money for college. Roberto's reaction to our increased college savings was lukewarm at best. "You are putting a lot of pressure on that boy," he commented during one Sunday dinner. "What if he does not want to go to college? What if he wants to work with his hands like his grandfather?" David assured his father that we would support Marcus regardless of his chosen path, but that we wanted to ensure college was an option if he desired it. The conversation revealed a fundamental difference in our family philosophies that went beyond mere cultural variation. Roberto viewed our college planning as presumptuous and potentially limiting. In his mind, we were channeling Marcus toward a specific future without considering his natural inclinations or interests. My family saw college preparation as providing options and opportunities, not dictating choices. Marcus started preschool at 4, attending a Montessori program that emphasized hands-on learning and individual exploration. He thrived in the environment, making friends easily and displaying particular aptitude for both creative projects and logical problem-solving. His teachers regularly commented on his focus and maturity, suggesting that he was academically advanced for his age. These reports delighted my parents and concerned Roberto in equal measure. My father began researching elementary schools with strong STEM programs, while Roberto worried that Marcus was becoming too cerebral and not spending enough time on practical skills. David found himself caught in the middle, trying to honor both perspectives while ensuring that Marcus felt loved and supported by all his family members. The financial aspect of Marcus's education became a more frequent topic of conversation as he approached school age. We had been contributing to his college fund for over 4 years, and the balance had grown to nearly $40,000 through a combination of our monthly contributions, gifts from my parents, and favorable market performance. The account represented security and opportunity, tangible proof of our commitment to Marcus's future. Roberto's comments about the college fund became increasingly pointed as the balance grew. $40,000, he said one evening, shaking his head as David mentioned the latest statement. Do you know what I could do with $40,000? I could buy another truck, hire 2 more employees, expand the business. That money is just sitting there earning pennies while it could be working in the real world. David patiently explained the concept of compound interest and long-term investment growth, but Roberto remained skeptical. In his experience, money that was not actively generating income through business operations was money being wasted. The stock market seemed like gambling to him, unpredictable and risky compared to the steady profits of his landscaping business. These conversations began to affect David's confidence in our financial planning. He started questioning whether we were being too conservative with our investment choices, or whether we should consider Roberto's suggestions about using some of the money for more immediate purposes. I reminded him that the money was specifically designated for Marcus's education, and that we had other savings for emergencies or opportunities. Marcus entered kindergarten at 6 years old, academically prepared and socially confident. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, quickly identified him as a student who would benefit from enrichment activities. She recommended that we consider supplemental programs in mathematics and reading, both of which would require additional financial investment but could significantly accelerate his learning. My parents were enthusiastic about these opportunities and offered to help with the costs. Roberto was less supportive, questioning whether a 6-year-old needed that much academic stimulation. When I was his age, he said, I was helping my father in the fields after school. I learned more about life in 1 afternoon of real work than Marcus will learn in a year of extra math classes. The tension came to a head during Marcus's 7th birthday party. We had invited both families to celebrate at our house, planning activities that would appeal to children and adults alike. My parents brought educational gifts, science kits, building blocks designed to teach engineering principles, and books about space exploration. Roberto and Carmen brought a child-sized tool set, a toy lawnmower, and work gloves designed for small hands. The contrast was stark and uncomfortable. Marcus, being 7, was delighted with all his gifts and did not notice the philosophical divide they represented. But the adults in the room were acutely aware of the competing visions for his future being displayed through these presents. Later that evening, after the guests had left and Marcus was asleep, David and I had our first serious argument about his father's influence on our son. I expressed concern that Roberto was actively undermining our educational goals and creating confusion for Marcus about what was expected of him. David defended his father's intentions while acknowledging that his methods were sometimes problematic. The argument revealed deeper issues in our marriage that we had been avoiding. David felt caught between loyalty to his family and support for our shared goals as parents. I felt that my values and our agreed-upon plans for Marcus's future were being constantly challenged and diminished. We both wanted what was best for our son, but we were beginning to disagree about what that meant. Professional counseling helped us navigate these challenges and establish clearer boundaries with both sets of grandparents. The counselor emphasized that children benefit from exposure to different perspectives, as long as the messages they receive are ultimately supportive and consistent. We learned to present a united front while still honoring our families' contributions to Marcus's life. Roberto's involvement in Marcus's life remained significant, but we established guidelines about discussions related to his future. When Roberto wanted to teach Marcus about landscaping equipment or construction techniques, we supported those activities as valuable learning experiences, but we made it clear that decisions about Marcus's education and long-term planning remained with David and me as his parents. The college fund continued to grow steadily as Marcus progressed through elementary school. By his 8th birthday, the balance had reached $67,000, representing years of consistent saving and careful financial planning. The account had weathered market fluctuations and continued to outperform our initial projections, putting us on track to have well over $100,000 available by the time Marcus graduated from high school. Marcus himself was thriving academically and socially. He maintained his curiosity about learning, while also developing practical skills through projects with his grandfather. He could explain the solar system in detail and also change the oil in a small engine. He read above grade level and could operate power tools safely under adult supervision. Rather than being conflicted by these diverse influences, he seemed to integrate them naturally. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to Roberto's increasing interest in the specifics of Marcus's college fund. His questions about account access, investment performance, and withdrawal procedures seemed casual at the time, but they represented a growing obsession with money he viewed as idle and unproductive. I answered his questions honestly, never imagining that the information would be used against our family's interests. The discovery that would shatter our trust and our marriage was still 3 weeks away. Marcus was beginning 3rd grade, excited about learning multiplication and joining the school's science club. David had just been promoted to senior engineer, and my freelance business was expanding rapidly. Our life felt stable and hopeful, built on a foundation of shared values and careful planning. But that foundation was about to be destroyed by someone we had trusted implicitly with our family's future. The man who had welcomed me into his family, who had held my newborn son with such tenderness, who had spoken so eloquently about character and integrity at our wedding, was about to prove that his true values were very different from the ones he professed. The morning I discovered Roberto's betrayal started like any other Tuesday. Marcus was excited about a field trip to the Science Museum, David was reviewing blueprints for a new project, and I was preparing presentations for 3 potential clients. None of us suspected that our world was about to be turned upside down by a phone call that would change everything we thought we knew about family, trust, and the price of blind loyalty. The call came at 11:47 in the morning, while I was reviewing social media analytics for a tech startup in downtown Portland. The number on my phone showed our bank's customer service line, which immediately triggered anxiety. Banks only called when something was seriously wrong. Mrs. Martinez, this is Jennifer from Pacific Northwest Bank's Fraud Prevention Department. The voice on the other end said with professional concern, "We're calling about some unusual activity on your son's education savings account. Are you available to discuss this matter?" My heart rate accelerated as I minimized my laptop screen and grabbed a pen. "Yes, I'm available. What kind of unusual activity?" The phrase fraud prevention sent cold tendrils of fear through my chest. Had someone hacked into Marcus's college fund? Was our financial information compromised? "We show a complete withdrawal of the account balance yesterday at 2:15 p.m., Jennifer continued, her tone carefully neutral. The withdrawal was made in person at our Hillsborough branch by someone listed as an authorized signatory. However, given the substantial amount and the fact that this account has only had deposits for the past 8 years, our system flagged it for review." The words hit me like physical blows. Complete withdrawal, $67,000. Yesterday afternoon. While I was working from home and Marcus was at school and David was at his office downtown. None of us had been anywhere near the Hillsborough branch. "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" I asked, hoping I had misunderstood. Someone withdrew the entire balance from my son's college fund? Yes, ma'am. The withdrawal was for $67,432.18. The person provided proper identification and signed the necessary paperwork. However, since this represents the complete liquidation of a long-term savings account, we wanted to verify that this transaction was authorized by all account holders. My hands began shaking as I pulled up our online banking on my computer. The college savings account that had shown a healthy balance just 3 days earlier now displayed a devastating zero. 8 years of careful saving, compound interest, and financial discipline had vanished overnight. Who made the withdrawal? I asked, though a sick certainty was already forming in my stomach. There were only 4 people listed as authorized signatories on Marcus's account: David, myself, my father, and Roberto. My father was in Taiwan visiting relatives, and David had been in meetings all day yesterday. I cannot provide specific details over the phone for security purposes, Jennifer explained, but I can tell you that the person who made the withdrawal is listed as an authorized signatory and provided valid identification. If you believe this transaction was unauthorized, we need to begin fraud investigation procedures immediately. The room seemed to spin around me as the implications crashed down. Roberto had stolen our son's college fund. The man who had bounced Marcus on his knee, who had taught him to identify different types of screws and bolts, who had spoken so passionately about family loyalty and trust, had walked into a bank and stolen $67,000 from his own grandson. I need to come in immediately, I said, my voice barely steady. This transaction was absolutely not authorized. I want to file a fraud report right now. Of course, Mrs. Martinez. I'll schedule you an appointment with our branch manager for this afternoon. Please bring identification and any documentation related to the account. I should warn you that fraud investigations can take several weeks, and recovery of funds is not guaranteed, especially when the withdrawal was made by an authorized signatory. After hanging up, I sat in my home office, staring at the computer screen, willing the numbers to change. $67,000 represented more than just money. It was Marcus's future, his opportunities, his freedom to choose his path in life. It was 8 years of sacrifice, of choosing practical cars over luxury models, of cooking at home instead of eating out, of saving for tomorrow instead of indulging today. My first instinct was to call David, but something held me back. I needed to understand the full scope of this betrayal before involving him. If Roberto had stolen from us, how would David react? Would he believe his father capable of such deception? Would he defend Roberto or support me? Our marriage had weathered disagreements about his father's influence before, but nothing approaching this magnitude. Instead, I called the bank back and requested detailed records of all account activity for the past month. What I discovered made the betrayal even more calculated and cruel. Roberto had been visiting the bank regularly for the past 3 weeks, asking questions about withdrawal procedures, required documentation, and processing times. This was not an impulsive decision or a moment of weakness. It was premeditated theft, carefully planned and systematically executed. The branch manager, a woman named Patricia Valdez, met with me at 3 p.m. in her private office. She reviewed the account records with professional sympathy, confirming what I already knew but hoped was somehow a mistake. Roberto had presented valid identification, signed all required paperwork, and walked out with a cashier's check for the full account balance. The challenge with authorized signatories, Patricia explained, is that legally they have every right to access the funds. When you added Mr. Martinez to the account 8 years ago, you granted him full withdrawal privileges. From the bank's perspective, yesterday's transaction was completely legitimate. I remembered the day we had added Roberto to the account. Marcus was 6 months old, and we were updating our estate planning documents. Our attorney had suggested adding trusted family members as signatories, in case something happened to David and me. Roberto had seemed like the obvious choice, a responsible grandfather who would ensure Marcus's educational funds remained protected. So we have no legal recourse? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. That depends entirely on your family's internal agreements about the account's purpose, Patricia replied carefully. If Mr. Martinez was added as a signatory with the understanding that he would only access funds for specific purposes, and he violated that understanding, you might have grounds for civil litigation. But from a banking perspective, he had every legal right to make that withdrawal. The drive home from the bank passed in a blur of rage and disbelief. I called David 3 times before he answered, his voice cheerful until he heard my tone. "Rebecca, what's wrong? You sound terrible." "I need you to come home immediately," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded despite the storm raging inside me. "Don't stop anywhere, don't call anyone, just come straight home. We need to talk." "Is Marcus okay? Are you hurt? What happened?" "Marcus is fine, I'm fine physically." "But David, your father stole Marcus's college fund. All of it. $67,000 is gone." The silence on the other end stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, David's voice came through, smaller and confused. "What do you mean, stole? There has to be some mistake. My father would never." "There's no mistake," I interrupted. "I've been to the bank, I've seen the records. Roberto withdrew every penny yesterday afternoon while we were all at work and school. It's gone, David. All of it." When David arrived home 20 minutes later, his face was pale and his hands were shaking. I showed him the bank records, the withdrawal documentation, and the account statements proving that our years of careful saving had been wiped out in a single transaction. He studied each document multiple times, as if hoping the numbers would somehow change. "There has to be an explanation," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe he was trying to protect the money somehow, or maybe he thought we needed it for something urgent. He wouldn't just steal from Marcus. That's his grandson. I watched my husband struggle to reconcile the father he loved with the evidence of betrayal spread across our kitchen table. David had always been caught between his family's values and ours, but this forced him to confront a truth he had never wanted to acknowledge. His father was capable of devastating deception. "David, he's been planning this for weeks," I said, showing him the records of Roberto's multiple bank visits. "This wasn't some misguided attempt to help us. This was calculated theft from our son's future." The color drained completely from David's face as he absorbed the timeline. Roberto had been systematically preparing to steal from us, while attending Marcus's baseball games, while joining us for Sunday dinners, while looking me in the eye and discussing Marcus's academic progress. The level of duplicity was staggering. "We have to call him," David said, reaching for his phone. "We have to give him a chance to explain before we assume the worst." I wanted to scream that there was no explanation that could justify stealing a child's college fund, but I recognized that David needed to hear Roberto's justification firsthand. He needed to understand who his father really was, not who he had always believed him to be. Roberto answered on the first ring, his voice jovial and relaxed. "David, perfect timing, Mijo. I was just thinking about calling you. How's my grandson doing?" The casual tone, the affectionate greeting, the inquiry about Marcus, all delivered by a man who had stolen from that same grandson less than 24 hours earlier. I watched David's face harden as the full reality of his father's deception became undeniable. "Dad, we need to talk about Marcus's college fund," David said, his voice strained with effort to remain calm. "The bank called Rebecca today. They said you withdrew all the money yesterday." "Oh, that," Roberto replied, as if David had asked about the weather. "Yes, I took care of that situation, don't worry about it." The dismissive tone was like gasoline on my already burning anger. Took care of that situation. As if our son's educational future was a minor inconvenience that Roberto had kindly resolved. "What do you mean, you took care of it?" David asked, putting the phone on speaker so I could hear the conversation. "That money was for Marcus's college education. You had no right to withdraw it." "Right?" Roberto's voice shifted, becoming defensive and slightly aggressive. "I had every right. My name is on that account, just like yours. And frankly, it was about time someone showed some sense about this whole college obsession." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to keep from snatching the phone and screaming at him. College obsession. 8 years of saving for our son's future reduced to an obsession in Roberto's mind. "Dad, that was $67,000. David continued, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. Where is the money now? It's invested properly, Roberto replied with satisfaction. I used it to buy another truck and some new equipment for the business. Now instead of sitting in some bank earning pennies, that money is actually working, generating real income that will benefit our whole family. The audacity was breathtaking. Roberto had not only stolen from his grandson, but had convinced himself that he was doing us a favor. In his mind, he had rescued Marcus's money from the foolishness of educational planning and invested it in something practical and worthwhile. You had no right to make that decision, I interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. That money was specifically designated for Marcus's education. It wasn't family money to be invested in your business. Rebecca. Roberto's tone became condescending, the way adults speak to children who don't understand important matters. You and David had been filling that boy's head with unrealistic expectations about college. Boys don't need college money. They need to learn practical skills, how to work with their hands, how to build something real. That's not your decision to make, I shot back, my voice shaking with rage. Marcus is our son, not yours. We decide what's best for his future, not you. Is he? Roberto asked, his voice turning cold. Because from where I stand, it looks like you've been more interested in turning him into some kind of academic robot than letting him be a normal boy. All those tutoring sessions and science camps and enrichment programs, you're stealing his childhood in the name of education. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Roberto was essentially arguing that by prioritizing Marcus's intellectual development, we were harming him, and that stealing his college fund was actually an act of protection. The twisted logic was infuriating and heartbreaking simultaneously. David finally found his voice again, though it trembled with emotion. Dad, regardless of your opinions about education, that money wasn't yours to take. You stole from your own grandson. I saved him from your wife's obsession with turning him into something he's not, Roberto replied sharply. That boy has Martinez blood in his veins. He doesn't need college to be successful. He needs to learn about real work, real skills, real contribution to society. So you decided to steal $67,000 to make that point? I asked, incredulous at his reasoning. I decided to invest that money in something that will actually benefit him, Roberto corrected. When Marcus is ready to join the family business, he'll have equipment and resources waiting for him. Real assets, not some meaningless piece of paper from a college that will leave him in debt and unprepared for the real world. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, growing more heated with each exchange. Roberto remained completely unrepentant, defending his actions as necessary intervention to save Marcus from our misguided parenting. He expressed no remorse for the betrayal, no acknowledgement of the trust he had violated, no recognition of the years of sacrifice his theft had negated. When David finally hung up, the silence in our kitchen was deafening. My husband sat with his head in his hands, processing the reality that his father had not only stolen from us but felt completely justified in doing so. The man he had looked up to his entire life, the example of integrity and hard work he had always cited, had revealed himself to be something much darker. He's not going to give it back, David said finally, his voice hollow with defeat. He actually believes he did the right thing. I wanted to comfort my husband, to find words that would somehow make this betrayal easier to bear, but I was struggling with my own emotions. Roberto had not just stolen money, he had stolen our trust, our sense of family security, and our confidence in the future we had been building for Marcus. What do we do now? David asked, looking at me with eyes that seemed to have aged years in the span of one conversation. The question hung between us, heavy with implications that extended far beyond the missing money. How do you rebuild trust with someone who feels no remorse for betraying you? How do you explain to an 8-year-old child that his grandfather stole his college fund? How do you maintain family relationships when fundamental values prove to be irreconcilably different? I had started the day believing I understood my place in the Martinez family, confident in the bonds that connected us despite our cultural differences. Now I realized I had been naive about the depth of Roberto's resentment toward our educational priorities. His theft was not just about money. It was a declaration of war against everything I valued as a parent. The afternoon stretched ahead of us, filled with impossible decisions and painful conversations. We needed to tell Marcus something about why his college fund was gone. We needed to decide whether to pursue legal action against Roberto. We needed to determine what this meant for our relationships with the rest of David's family. Most importantly, we needed to figure out how to rebuild our son's educational savings while processing the emotional devastation of this betrayal. But first, we needed to sit with the crushing reality that someone we had trusted with our family's most important financial goal had destroyed it without hesitation or regret. Roberto had not just taken our money, he had taken our innocence about family loyalty and the lengths people will go to impose their values on others. Marcus would be home from school in 2 hours, excited to share stories about his day and work on homework that Roberto now viewed as worthless preparation for a future that should never happen. How do you look at your child's enthusiasm for learning and explain that someone who claims to love him has actively sabotaged his opportunities? The weight of these questions settled over our house like a heavy blanket, suffocating the joy and optimism that had defined our family life just 24 hours earlier. Roberto's theft had stolen more than money. It had stolen our sense of safety within our own family and our confidence that love and good intentions would protect us from those who claimed to care about our well-being. David reached across the table and took my hand, his grip tight with desperation and determination. "We'll figure this out," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We'll find a way to rebuild the fund and protect Marcus from this ugliness." I squeezed his hand in return, drawing strength from his touch, even as I wondered whether our marriage could survive the stress of this betrayal. Roberto had not just stolen from us. He had driven a wedge between David and me that might prove impossible to remove. How do you rebuild trust when your family's foundation has been revealed to be built on quicksand? The sound of the school bus approaching our neighborhood interrupted our heavy silence. Marcus would bound through the door any moment, his backpack full of completed assignments and his head full of questions about the science project we had been planning together. For now, we would protect his innocence and enthusiasm, while we figured out how to rebuild what his grandfather had destroyed. But even as we prepared to greet our son with forced smiles and manufactured normalcy, I knew that everything had changed. Roberto's theft had revealed truths about our family that could never be unknown, broken trusts that might never be repaired, and highlighted differences that seemed impossible to bridge. The battle for Marcus's future was just beginning, and I was no longer certain who our allies would be in the fight ahead. Marcus burst through the front door at 3:45 p.m. with his usual after-school energy, his backpack sliding off one shoulder as he called out his daily greeting. "Dad, guess what happened in science class today?" His voice carried the excitement that had become routine since starting 3rd grade, where every discovery felt monumental and worth sharing. David and I exchanged glances across the kitchen table, our faces still bearing the strain of the afternoon's revelations. We had spent the past hour in stunned silence, alternating between disbelief and rage, trying to process the magnitude of Roberto's betrayal. Now we needed to shift into parent mode, protecting our son's innocence while grappling with our own devastation. "What happened in science class, sweetheart?" I asked, forcing enthusiasm into my voice as Marcus dropped his backpack and launched into an animated explanation about magnets and magnetic fields. His teacher had demonstrated how invisible forces could move objects without touching them, a concept that fascinated him beyond measure. "Mrs. Peterson said that magnetic fields are everywhere, even around the Earth," he continued, his hands gesturing wildly to illustrate planetary magnetism. "And she said that's why compasses work, because they're attracted to the North Pole. Can we make our own compass this weekend?" "Absolutely," David replied, his voice steadier than I expected given the circumstances. "We can use a needle and a magnet to magnetize it, then float it in water." It's one of my favorite experiments. Watching Marcus's face light up at the prospect of a weekend science project, I felt the full weight of what Roberto had stolen. This wasn't just about $67,000. It was about Marcus's future opportunities to explore these interests at advanced levels, to attend universities with cutting-edge research facilities, to pursue whatever path his curiosity might lead him down. The evening routine proceeded with forced normalcy. Marcus completed his homework at the kitchen table while I prepared dinner, and David reviewed work emails. But underneath the surface, tension crackled like electricity. Every few minutes, one of us would glance at the phone, wondering if Roberto would call with some explanation or apology. He never did. During dinner, Marcus chattered about his upcoming science fair project, his plan to investigate whether different types of music affected plant growth. "I want to play classical music to one plant, rock music to another, and no music to the third one," he explained between bites of pasta. "Then I'll measure which one grows the tallest." "That sounds like a wonderful hypothesis to test," I said, trying to focus on his enthusiasm rather than the knowledge that funding his future scientific education had just become infinitely more complicated. "How will you make sure the experiment is fair?" "I'll use the same type of seeds, the same amount of water, and put them all in the same place so they get the same amount of sunlight," Marcus replied proudly. Mrs. Peterson taught us about controlling variables. After Marcus went to bed, David and I returned to the kitchen table to discuss our options. The bank records lay spread before us like evidence of a crime, which in many ways they were. Legally, Roberto had committed no crime since he was an authorized signatory. Morally and ethically, however, his actions constituted a profound violation of trust. "I keep thinking there must be some way to reason with him," David said, staring at the withdrawal documentation. "Maybe if we explain how much this money meant to Marcus's future, he'll realize what he's done and find a way to make it right." I appreciated David's optimism, but Roberto's complete lack of remorse during our phone conversation had made his position crystal clear. "David, he doesn't see what he did as wrong. In his mind, he saved Marcus from our misguided priorities. He's not going to give that money back willingly. So what are our options?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be satisfying. I had spent the afternoon researching our legal alternatives, while waiting for him to come home. "We can file a civil lawsuit for conversion of funds, but that would be expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain. Since he was an authorized signatory, proving wrongful appropriation would be challenging. What about family pressure? Maybe if my mother and siblings understand what happened, they can convince him to return the money." This suggestion worried me more than the legal options. Roberto's theft had already driven a wedge between David and his father. Involving the extended Martinez family risked creating permanent divisions that could affect Marcus's relationships with his aunts, uncles, and cousins for years to come. "Are you prepared for them to take his side?" I asked gently. "Roberto is going to present this as rescuing Marcus from our educational obsession. Some of your family members might agree with him." David's face crumpled as he considered this possibility. His siblings had always respected their father's judgment, and several of them shared his skepticism about higher education. The idea that they might support Roberto's theft rather than condemn it was almost too painful to contemplate. The next morning brought our first glimpse of how the extended family would react. Carmen called at 7:30 a.m. while we were getting Marcus ready for school. I answered the phone to her voice, tight with distress and confusion. "Rebecca, Roberto told me about the situation with Marcus's college fund." She began without preamble. "I'm so sorry this has caused problems between you and David. Can we meet for coffee this morning to discuss how to resolve this peacefully?" The careful phrasing revealed that Roberto had already shaped the narrative to minimize his culpability. This wasn't about theft or betrayal in Carmen's mind. It was about a family disagreement that needed diplomatic resolution. "Carmen, Roberto stole $67,000 from his own grandson." I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. "This isn't a disagreement that can be resolved over coffee. This is a crime." "Rebecca, please," Carmen pleaded. "Roberto is not a criminal. He's a man who has worked his entire life to build something for his family. Maybe his methods were wrong, but his heart was in the right place." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Carmen alternating between acknowledging Roberto's mistakes and defending his motivations. She proposed various compromise solutions. Roberto could pay the money back gradually over several years, or he could set aside business profits to recreate the college fund, or we could consider the withdrawn funds as an early inheritance for Marcus. Each suggestion missed the fundamental point. Roberto had violated our trust and stolen our son's future without permission or remorse. No payment plan or compromise could restore what he had taken from us, which was not just money but security, trust, and peace of mind. The meeting with our attorney, Rebecca Chen, took place that afternoon in her downtown Portland office. Sarah was a family friend who specialized in estate planning and had helped us establish the college fund originally. Her reaction to Roberto's theft was immediate and unequivocal. "This is exactly why I always recommend limiting the number of authorized signatories on children's accounts," she said, reviewing the bank documentation. Legally, Roberto had every right to make that withdrawal. Ethically and morally, his actions are reprehensible, but proving wrongful appropriation in court would be extremely difficult. "So we have no recourse?" David asked, his voice heavy with defeat. "You have options, but none of them are ideal," Sarah replied. "You could file a civil lawsuit, but given Roberto's authorized status, you would need to prove that he exceeded the scope of his signing authority, or that there was an explicit agreement limiting his access to the funds." "There was an agreement," I said. "When we added him to the account, it was specifically for emergency access if something happened to David and me. It was never intended to give him discretionary spending authority." "Can you prove that agreement in writing?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. We had no written documentation of the limitations on Roberto's account access. Our conversation 8 years earlier had been informal, conducted in our living room while Marcus napped. Roberto had agreed to serve as an emergency contact for the account, but we had never formalized the scope of his responsibilities or restrictions. Without written documentation, proving the scope of his authority becomes a matter of he said, she said, Sarah explained. Roberto's defense would be that he was protecting Marcus's interests by redirecting the funds toward practical assets rather than speculative investments. The legal consultation left us feeling more hopeless than empowered. Even if we pursued litigation and won, recovering the funds would require Roberto to liquidate business assets, which could take months or years. Meanwhile, the legal fees would consume resources we needed to rebuild Marcus's college fund. That evening, David made the decision I had been dreading. "I need to talk to my father face to face," he announced after Marcus had gone to bed. "I need to look him in the eye and try to understand how he could do this to his own grandson." I wanted to argue that Roberto had already made his position clear, but I recognized that David needed this confrontation to achieve closure. He needed to see his father's lack of remorse firsthand before he could accept that the man he had always admired was capable of such calculated betrayal. "I'm coming with you," I said, despite every instinct telling me to stay away from Roberto indefinitely. "Rebecca, that might not be a good idea," David replied. "He's already defensive about your influence on Marcus. Your presence might make him less likely to admit he was wrong." "David, this affects our entire family. I'm not hiding while you confront him alone. We're in this together, or we're not in it at all." The drive to Roberto and Carmen's house the next evening felt like traveling to a funeral. The familiar ranch-style home where we had shared countless Sunday dinners now seemed foreign and unwelcoming. Roberto's trucks and landscaping equipment filled the driveway, purchased with money that should have been funding our son's education. Carmen met us at the door, her face drawn with stress and exhaustion. "He's in the backyard," she said quietly. "Please, try to keep this civil." This whole situation has been hard on everyone. Roberto was cleaning equipment when we found him, his movements methodical and focused. He looked up as we approached, his expression guarded but not apologetic. No shame or remorse crossed his features, only the wariness of someone preparing for an unpleasant but necessary conversation. "David, Rebecca," he acknowledged with a nod. "I figured you would come by eventually." "Dad, we need to talk about what you did," David began, his voice steady despite the emotions I could see churning beneath the surface. "That money belonged to Marcus. It was his future." "That money was wasted potential," Roberto replied, setting down the equipment he had been cleaning. "Sitting in a bank, earning nothing, while that boy's real future was being ignored. I did what needed to be done. What needed to be done was respecting our decisions as Marcus's parents. I interjected, unable to remain silent. You had no right to impose your values on our family's financial planning. Roberto's eyes hardened as he turned his attention to me. My values build everything you see here, he said, gesturing toward his house and business equipment. My values put food on the table and a roof over my family's head. Your values are turning my grandson into someone who thinks he's too good for honest work. Our values include respect for education and preparing Marcus for whatever future he chooses. I shot back. Your theft eliminated options that we spent 8 years creating. Theft? Roberto's voice rose with indignation. I invested that money in something real, something tangible. When Marcus is ready to join the family business, he'll have equipment waiting for him. He'll have a legacy, not a piece of paper that gets him into debt. The circular argument continued for over an hour, with Roberto defending his actions and dismissing our concerns. He showed no recognition of the trust he had violated or the years of sacrifice his withdrawal had negated. In his mind, he had rescued Marcus from our misguided parenting and invested his money wisely. What if Marcus wants to go to college? David asked during a brief lull in the heated exchange. What if he wants to become a scientist or an engineer or a doctor? What if working with his hands isn't enough for him? Then he'll learn that the world doesn't owe him anything just because he has fancy degrees, Roberto replied dismissively. He'll learn that real success comes from hard work and practical skills, not from sitting in classrooms talking about theories. The conversation revealed the depth of Roberto's resentment toward education and his absolute conviction that his worldview was superior to ours. He genuinely believed he was saving Marcus from a future of disappointment and debt. No amount of reasoning or pleading would change his position because he saw our educational priorities as fundamentally misguided. When we finally left that evening, David was visibly shaken by his father's intransigence. The drive home passed in heavy silence, both of us processing the reality that Roberto felt no remorse and had no intention of returning the money or acknowledging the harm he had caused. He's not the man I thought he was, David said finally as we pulled into our driveway. I've spent my whole life looking up to him, thinking he was this example of integrity and family loyalty. But what he did to Marcus, what he did to us, it's unforgivable. The decision to cut contact with Roberto was not made lightly or quickly. It evolved over several days of painful conversations between David and me, consultations with our attorney, and sleepless nights spent agonizing over the impact on Marcus and our extended family relationships. David's siblings reacted predictably when they learned about our decision. His sister Maria called us selfish and ungrateful. His brother Carlos suggested we were overreacting to a family disagreement. Only his youngest sister Elena expressed any understanding of our position, and even she hoped we would eventually reconcile. He's still your father, Maria argued during a particularly heated phone conversation. Family doesn't abandon each other over money. Dad was trying to help in his own way. He stole from his own grandson, David replied, his voice tired from repeating the same argument. There's no way to spin that as helping. The conversation ended with Maria hanging up, and we haven't spoken since. The extended family gatherings that had been such an important part of Marcus's childhood became impossible to navigate. Taking him to events where Roberto would be present felt like exposing him to someone who had actively harmed his interests. Rebuilding Marcus's college fund became our new financial priority, but the task felt overwhelming. Starting over at age 8 meant we had lost not just the money but also the time value of compound interest. The $67,000 Roberto had stolen would have grown to over $150,000 by the time Marcus graduated high school. Now we would be fortunate to accumulate half that amount. I increased my freelance workload, taking on additional clients and working longer hours. David pursued overtime opportunities and considered taking a part-time job on weekends. Every financial decision became filtered through the question of how it would affect Marcus's educational fund. The stress was enormous, but it also provided focus and purpose during a period when everything else felt uncertain. Marcus began noticing the changes in our family dynamics, though we tried to shield him from the details. He asked why we stopped visiting Grandpa Roberto, and why certain cousins no longer came to his birthday parties. We explained that sometimes adults have disagreements that affect family relationships, but we assured him that he was loved and that our family would be fine. The most painful part was watching Marcus's confusion about his grandfather's absence. Roberto had been a significant presence in his life, teaching him about tools and equipment, telling stories about building the business, and providing a different perspective on masculinity and success. Losing that relationship was another casualty of Roberto's theft. 6 months after the theft, we received an unexpected call from Carmen. Roberto had suffered a heart attack and was in the hospital. Despite everything that had happened, David insisted on visiting his father, and after much internal debate, I agreed to accompany him. Roberto looked smaller and more fragile in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and breathing assistance equipment. His usual commanding presence was diminished by illness and vulnerability. When he saw us enter his room, his eyes filled with tears. The first sign of emotion he had shown since stealing Marcus's money. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're still my father," David replied, though his tone remained distant. "I couldn't stay away when you're sick." The conversation that followed was unlike any we had shared since the theft. Roberto's brush with mortality seemed to have given him perspective on his actions and their consequences. For the first time, he acknowledged that his methods had been wrong, even if he still believed his intentions were good. "I lost my grandson because I was too proud to admit I might be wrong about his future," he said, struggling to speak clearly. "I lost my son because I put my values above my family's trust. The money, the equipment, none of it matters if I don't have my family." The apology felt genuine, but it came 6 months too late, and under circumstances that made it impossible to determine whether Roberto truly understood the magnitude of his betrayal, or was simply frightened by his own mortality. "What happens to the equipment you bought with Marcus's money?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me throughout his recovery. "It will be sold," Roberto said without hesitation. "Whatever we can recover will go back into an account for Marcus's education. It won't be the full amount, and it won't make up for the time we lost, but it's what I can do to try to make this right." The equipment sale netted $43,000 after depreciation and business debts were considered. Combined with our renewed savings efforts, Marcus's college fund slowly began to rebuild. It would never reach the levels it would have achieved without Roberto's interference, but it represented a foundation we could build upon. Roberto's recovery was slow, but steady. His heart attack had forced him to step back from the physical demands of his business, creating space for reflection that his busy work schedule had never allowed. He began attending counseling sessions focused on understanding why he had prioritized his values over his family's autonomy. The path toward reconciliation was neither straight nor simple. Trust, once broken so completely, could not be easily restored. David maintained limited contact with his father, primarily focused on Roberto's health and business affairs. I remained more guarded, unwilling to risk future betrayals but open to supervised interactions that prioritized Marcus's well-being. Marcus's relationship with his grandfather resumed gradually, with carefully structured visits that included both David and me. Roberto seemed genuinely committed to respecting our parenting decisions and supporting Marcus's educational interests, even when they conflicted with his personal preferences. The science fair project about music and plant growth earned Marcus first place in his grade level, and Roberto attended the presentation despite his lingering skepticism about academic pursuits. Watching him applaud his grandson's scientific methodology and conclusions, I saw glimpses of the man David had always believed his father to be. 2 years after the theft, our family had found a new equilibrium, built on clearly defined boundaries and carefully managed expectations. Roberto's presence in our lives was limited but positive, focused on areas where his skills and interests could benefit Marcus, without undermining our educational priorities. Marcus, now 10 years old, was thriving academically and socially. His curiosity about science and mathematics continued to grow, supported by a rebuilt college fund that, while smaller than originally planned, still represented our commitment to his future opportunities. He knew the basic facts about what had happened to his original college money, but we had framed it as a family learning experience about trust and financial responsibility. The stolen money had taught us valuable lessons about the importance of legal protections, clear communication of expectations, and the danger of assuming that family loyalty guarantees respect for boundaries. Our new college savings account had only 2 authorized signatories, David and me. All other family members, regardless of their good intentions, would need legal guardianship to access Marcus's educational funds. More importantly, Roberto's theft had forced us to examine our own values and priorities as parents. We remained committed to providing Marcus with excellent educational opportunities, but we also recognized the importance of practical skills and diverse perspectives on success. Our parenting approach became more intentionally balanced, incorporating both academic excellence and hands-on learning. The financial impact of Roberto's theft would affect our family for years to come. Marcus would likely graduate from college with more student loan debt than originally planned, and we would need to work longer before retirement to compensate for the lost savings time. But these practical consequences paled in comparison to the relationship damage that had been caused and slowly repaired. David's relationship with his father would never return to its previous unconditional trust, but it had evolved into something more honest and realistic. Roberto's counseling had helped him understand that love does not justify control, and that supporting family members means respecting their autonomy even when disagreeing with their choices. Looking back on the experience 3 years later, I can see how Roberto's theft was both a devastating betrayal and an unexpected catalyst for growth. It forced our family to clarify our values, strengthen our boundaries, and develop more intentional approaches to both financial planning and relationship management. Marcus's college fund now sits at $38,000, growing steadily through our continued contributions and market performance. It will never reach the levels it would have achieved without Roberto's interference, but it represents something perhaps more valuable: our demonstrated commitment to supporting our son's dreams despite obstacles and setbacks. The trust that was broken when Roberto walked into that bank has been partially rebuilt through years of consistent actions and honest communication. Our family gatherings now include him again, though with clear understanding that his role is grandfather, not financial advisor or life coach for our son. Roberto still believes that practical skills are more valuable than formal education, but he has learned to express those beliefs through teaching moments rather than financial sabotage. Marcus now knows how to change oil, operate basic tools, and understand business principles alongside his academic studies. The integration of these different types of learning has made him more well-rounded and confident. The lesson that emerged from this painful experience was not that families should be trusted blindly, but that love requires respect for autonomy and boundaries. Roberto's theft was motivated by love for his grandson, but it was expressed through control and disrespect for our parenting decisions. True love would have involved supporting our choices even while disagreeing with them. As Marcus approaches his teenage years, his interests continue to evolve in ways that honor both sides of his heritage. He excels in science and mathematics, planning to pursue engineering in college. But he also enjoys working on projects with his grandfather, learning skills that ground his theoretical knowledge in practical application. The college fund that was once stolen and partially recovered now represents more than money. It symbolizes our family's resilience, our commitment to learning from mistakes, and our determination to support Marcus's future, regardless of the obstacles we face. Roberto's theft taught us that protecting our children's opportunities requires both financial planning and careful attention to the people we trust with our family's most important assets. The pain of betrayal has faded, but the lessons learned remain sharp and clear. Trust must be earned and maintained through consistent actions. Family love does not justify boundary violations. And sometimes the most important growth comes from surviving the worst moments with integrity and determination to rebuild something better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.